When we made the Harvest Moon table mat, we used an Invisible Machine Applique step that I wanted to go into further explanation because so many people have tried Invisible Machine Applique and found that they absolutely hate it. A reason for this is back in the day, the Invisible Machine Applique thread, which is a monofilament thread, felt like fishing line, and it was a nightmare to work with. The machines seemed to jam up all the time, and it just was a pain. So everybody gave it up, and since then the thread companies have come up with some great monofilament threads. They're much smaller. They're 0.004 diameter, so they're very thin, and now they're coming in different colors. Not only do you get that as a clear, you can also get it as a smoke, black. There's all sorts of colors now, but Invisible Machine Applique has to be set up correctly. Otherwise, you're still going to be frustrated and things aren't going to go the way you want them to. So here are some tips for Invisible Machine Applique. Number one, you want to set up your machine to do a very small zigzag. Small meaning 1 inch long, 1 inch wide. You don't want a very, very long, wide zigzag. You want it kind of close together, and we're going to demo that in just a second. The second thing you want to do is make sure that you have 7511 sharp needles, Microtech sharp, or in my case, I'm using an embroidery needle. I still have a very small eye. Even a size 60 needle would work. I like the Schmetz brand needles. I think they're just fine. But you need to have a very small eye needle because the monofilament thread is very, very thin and small as well. So that's the next biggest thing, is making sure that you have the right size needle. And remember, when you're using a bigger needle, it's going to punch bigger holes in the fabric. So you want to stick with a smaller needle. The monofilament thread is also you must get it absolutely right. It's very thin. It's not fishing line. And in my case, I'm using a Mettler invisible thread. I absolutely love this. It's very nice. It's smoke colored, so I can kind of see it, but kind of not. And then at that point, I'm going to also use it in the bobbin. Now, that's scary, and I understand that everybody gets scared about putting bobbin thread in the bobbin because that's where the majority of the problems used to exist back in the day. That being said, it's because the thread was too thick and it was an issue. But now that the threads have come down and they're thinner, the trick to the bobbin thread is not filling it the whole way. Let me repeat that. Do not fill the bobbin the whole way with the monofilament thread. It will bust your bobbin. So you only want to fill it a quarter of the way, a third of the way, and once you have that full, or not full, but filled to about a third of the bobbin, that's plenty. Chances are you're not going to go through the whole bobbin anyway. It's one of those things that you kind of like half fill and then set it aside for all the other projects. So just make sure that you don't fill that bobbin all the way up. You want to make sure that you have the option to have your needle drop into your fabric so that every time you stop, it comes to a stop. That is almost essential when you're appliquing anyway, because there's a whole lot of pivoting that happens when we applique. We have to go around curves and points and those kinds of things. So if your machine has a needle drop, that's great. I highly suggest that you use that at that point. It's just really nice to have. Okay. So, and then we're going to go slowly. Now I know that there's some lead-footed sewing going on out there, and that's great fun and well for when we're just piecing. But in machine applique, it's kind of a slow process. If you don't have a lot of time, I would suggest finding, another time to do your applique, because it does take a little bit of accuracy. Usually the mistakes happen when you're going too quickly, and that's just not what you're not gonna be happy with the end result. So make sure that you go kind of slowly. This isn't a race to get done. Just take your time with it. So, and the one of the other things that you want to make sure of is that your tension is dropped on your machine. So the monofilament thread because it's very thin, it doesn't need a whole lot of tension put on it. So I usually drop my machine back to 1, 2 for tension. It behaves beautifully at that point. You just want to make sure that it's still making a proper stitch, but it does need to be absolutely dropped. So you want to drop your tension back on your machine, and just make sure that your bobbin thread or your bobbin monofilament doesn't come up to the top. I would definitely do a scrap test with the Zig Zag and get ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and set my machine and we'll start zigzagging. So in the first part of the video, I said that the zigzag should be 1 inch long and 1 inch wide. That's actually incorrect. I didn't mean 1 inch like an inch. It's like, the setting on the machine is 1 by 1. So it's a 1 length and a 1 millimeter width. If you want to go bigger than that and you like seeing a bigger zigzag, have at it. That's fantastic. But, you know, you get it to where you like it. In our case, the crow that we're going to do right now, he is still raw edge. I've only put heat and bond on the back of him, and I'm going to zigzag all around him. When you do needle turn applique, you would have a folded edge along here that you'd be sewing on, and you could still use the exact same process for setting up your machine and getting that all correct. But in my case, this is still a raw edge. So we're going to want to make sure that we go slowly, we take our time. And if you have a foot lifter at your knee on your machine, this is a good time to use that foot lifter. It's fantastic. I'm going to show you in just a second how we don't have to keep raising the presser foot up and down in the back. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go, you know, slowly just to get you started here. And what I'm doing is I'm just zigzagging right over. Notice that I have an open toe applique foot. I can completely see everything that is going on with that needle. Now I'm going to stop here. I'm going to use my knee to pivot, and then I'm going to continue around. I'm going to stop in that corner and pivot back and keep going. I just love the knee lifter on my machine. I use it all the time, even when I'm piecing. I find that it saves me from having to reach up and down 100 million times when I'm needing to raise. So I'm going to pivot that corner there, go around. Now keep in mind, I've been doing this a while. This is not my first attempt at Invisible Machine Applique. So, you know, you have to give yourself permission to be okay with your first go at this. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have mistakes. It's a little bit getting used to. There's a lot of moving of the fabric back and forth. So if you don't get it the first time out, it's not perfect. That's okay. You know, turn that project into maybe a placemat to use, or a coaster or something that you can kind of, you know, forgive yourself over. But eventually what happens, as with anything, a little bit of practice, you will be able to get this technique. Again, it's just taking the time. The machine settings are essential. If you are doing anything with invisible thread, it is essential that you set that machine up properly. So many people leave their tension as if they were sewing with a thicker thread because they've been quilting or sewing crafts, and this behaves differently. You have to let that tension go. Not completely. You're not going to go turning it down to 0 or anything like that, but you do want to definitely release the tension on this. And again, don't fill that bobbin all the way up. It will blow up your bobbin. We've seen it happen. This is the technique that we've taught in our classes at our shop. And I will give credit to our wonderful instructor, Nancy, who taught this for many years in our shop. Lots of successful applique students came through and left very happy once they learned how to get their machine set up. And I think that is the biggest hang up with people is, oh, I don't like applique because that invisible monofilament thread is a nightmare. Well, it's not a nightmare anymore. Like I said, the thread companies have definitely fixed the thickness issue, thankfully, and we can go on our merry way now. And Invisible Machine Applique is so wonderful too, because there's just times you don't want to see the zigzag stitch. You want it to, you want the focus to be on the fabric itself, not on the zigzag. So of course there's a time for the other as well, but this isn't necessarily one of them. So again, I use some heat and bond Lite on mine. anytime you're using a transfer process of heat and bond, you want to use the light, not the heavy. The heavy you don't want to sew through, it will gum up your needle. The heat and bond light is very good about keeping the glue off of the needle. And if you have a 7511 or a 60/8 needle at home, that you just haven't used for a while, pull that out, switch your needle. Don't get stuck with, well, I have an 80/12 in there. It's going to punch this fabric and it's going to have a ton of holes in it. It's not going to look right. So we're going to go ahead and finish up with our crow, and we'll show you what this looks like in just a second. All right, so we got our crow Invisible Machine Applique down. He looks really good. I'm pretty happy with the results. The machine behaved beautifully. The thread behaved beautifully. I hope you have learned something from our little demonstration here. One thing I also wanted to note is my background fabric that I used in this. It's a Moda swirl muslin mate fabric, good quality cotton as always. I did go ahead and starch this before I started appliquing down. Anytime you're appliquing, adding a little stability to the fabric is essential. It keeps it from really stretching out of place. So you can see here, I didn't have any tension, like puckers or anything like that. Everything is nice and flat and smooth. So I know I did a good job setting my tension, and I'm ready to go on to other wonderful applique projects. So I hope you learned something from our Invisible Machine Applique, and like us and subscribe for more tech tips and techniques.